I am genuinely excited to jump into our deep dive today. We're going to be unpacking some brand new and, honestly, highly impactful polling data from Reuters and Ipsos. We're looking squarely at the shifting political economy right ahead of the November midterms. There is a ton of fascinating data to cover that literally connects global geopolitics straight to the American voter's wallet. So, let's get right into it. Okay, let's dive into this. 10 years. For the first time in nearly a decade, we're seeing a massive shift in exactly who the American public trusts to steer the U.S. economy. And that is a huge metric. The economy is traditionally the absolute number one issue driving voter behavior. So a shift of this magnitude, especially after a decade of consistency, that's exactly the kind of signal we need to pay very close attention to. Here's our roadmap for today. First, a historic polling shift. Second, the catalyst at the pump. Third, breaking down the ballot. And finally, the November midterm battlefield. Section 1, a historic polling shift. When you look at the raw numbers, it's a razor-thin margin. Registered voters were asked which party has a better approach to the U.S. economy. Well, 37% picked the Democratic Party and 36% picked the Republican Party. Sure, it's a statistical dead heat, but the fact that Democrats hold that 1-point edge at all is what makes this so historic. And don't miss that remaining group. A full 27% said they were either unsure or that a completely different party would do a better job. That is a massive chunk of the electorate that's currently feeling kind of politically homeless when it comes to economic stewardship. To really grasp why this 1-point lead matters so much, we have to look back at the timeline. Republicans have steadily held the economic advantage through the past 3 administrations. We're talking through President Trump's first term from 2017 to 2021, entirely through President Joe Biden's term, and right into President Trump's second term. The last time Democrats had an edge in a similarly conducted poll was way back in May of 2017. And even then, it's worth noting the question was asked a little differently without giving folks the option to say they were unsure. So this current shift, it represents a genuine, real-time break in a years-long trend of Republican dominance on the economic question. Moving on to Section 2, the catalyst at the pump. So let's map out exactly how this builds. It's essentially a chain reaction connecting geopolitical conflict directly to domestic economic pressure. Step 1, the catalyst was the U.S. and Israeli attacks on Iran back in February. Step 2, that initial action evolved into a simmering war that has just continued unabated in the region. And step 3, because of all that ongoing instability in such a major oil-producing region, gasoline prices here in the U.S. have surged by more than 25% since the war began. It's literally a textbook example of foreign policy creating immediate domestic economic consequences. Looking at the policy decisions behind that very first step, President Trump's stated objectives for the strikes were threefold. First, to dismantle Iran's nuclear program. Second, to curb the nation's ability to attack regional rivals. And third, to create the conditions necessary for Iranians to overthrow their clerical rulers. Those were the strategic, geopolitical goals that ultimately ignited the conflict we're now seeing play out in the energy markets. And here is where it really hits home for U.S. household finances. Because of that 25% surge we just talked about, Americans are now paying, on average, more than $1 extra per gallon at the pump. When everyday citizens feel a sudden, unavoidable squeeze on their weekly budgets, like just trying to fill up their cars to get to work, it immediately impacts their perception of the broader economy. That single extra dollar is the primary weight dragging down the Republican economic advantage we saw earlier. Section 3, breaking down the ballot. So the crucial point is how this translates to voting intentions. When the Reuters/Ipsos poll asked registered voters who they'd vote for in congressional elections, if the contest were held today, 42% picked the Democrats, while 37% picked the Republicans. That is a clear 5-point advantage for the Democratic Party on the generic congressional ballot. It really appears that the frustration over household finances is manifesting directly into a desire for a shift in congressional control. Digging a little deeper, we find something absolutely fascinating. Independent voters picked Democrats over Republicans by a massive 12 percentage points. A 12-point swing in this critical group clearly illustrates how severely inflation at the pump is alienating voters who aren't firmly anchored to any specific political base. And this shifting sentiment is showing up in the executive branch metrics, too. President Trump's approval rating has fallen to 35%, which is down from 37% in a prior Reuters/Ipsos poll conducted just last month. To put that into historical context, this 35% mark puts the share of Americans who give his presidency a thumbs up within just one single percentage point of the lowest level of his entire term. These economic pressures are just creating a very tough polling environment for the incumbent administration. Now, the president has repeatedly pushed back against these metrics. On Monday morning, just ahead of the official release of this latest poll, President Trump posted this statement to his Truth Social account. He said, "My real polling numbers, not those made out by the fake news media, are the best they have ever been." It's a stark contrast, right? We're seeing widespread public polling data showing voter dissatisfaction on one hand, and entirely different internal metrics being emphasized by the president himself on the other. Which brings us to Section 4, the November midterm battlefield. This brilliantly illustrates a pretty wild paradox. While the national mood shows that 5-point Democratic advantage we discussed, the actual political battlefield is surprisingly small. Out of all 435 House seats, only about 36 are actually expected to be competitive. And over in the Senate, only about 8. But because of those exact numbers, the stakes could not be higher. Republicans will be defending incredibly narrow congressional majorities coming up on November 3rd. When your majority is that razor thin, you don't need a national landslide to lose power. You really only need to lose a handful of those 36 competitive House seats or 8 competitive Senate seats. And that is exactly why this shift in independent voters and the sheer frustration over the economy are causing such a massive ripple effect in political strategies right now. Before we wrap up today, for all of you focused learners out there who love the hard data, let's quickly touch on the methodology behind today's explainer. This was a Reuters/Ipsos poll fielded online nationwide from Wednesday through Monday. It features a very robust sample size of 4,505 U.S. adults, and that yields a margin of error of just 2 percentage points. So what does that mean? It means the trends we discussed today, from the economic trust shift to the congressional ballot test, are statistically significant, highly reliable indicators of current public sentiment. Which leaves us with one massive, pivotal question to consider. How will energy prices continue to shape voter sentiment between now and November 3rd? If the geopolitical situation stabilizes and gas prices drop, will the Republicans regain their decade-long economic advantage? Or has the financial sting fundamentally shifted the landscape for the upcoming midterms for good? Something to think about. Thank you so much for learning with me today, and I'll see you in the next explainer.